You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Chris in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, TV shows, games, books, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 645, where tonight we're going to actually break down an infamous quote spoken by none other than Luke Skywalker during The Empire Strikes Back, asking the question of whether or not is the dark side stronger. So it's a topic that we've talked about many, many times on this show, but we've actually never broken down the quote, looked at the analysis, and then kind of talked about, you know, some of the reasons why or why not the dark side is stronger, or maybe it's not. So we're going to break all that down. And to help me do that, of course, is someone who's with me every single week. Chris, welcome back, man. It's been 2 weeks. We had a spring break in there. I know you were traveling. You had some conventions that you went to. And so it was a nice break, quite honestly, because starting next week, we're not going to be coming up for air until May 4th. So it was a good break. But welcome back to the show, sir.
Oh, thanks. I missed it, and I'm glad to be back. But no, in reality, we're not going to probably have a break until the beginning of June with, Shadow Lord coming out. And then by the time Shadow Lord is over, it's going to be full-blown Mandalorian and Grogu till May 22nd, if not, again, until sometime in June. So, yeah, we're going to be busy, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I didn't think about that either. But, yeah, so nonetheless, it was good to get a little break in there. So thank you guys for being patient and rolling with the punches. I know we've been shifting this off after for about 2 weeks now, but we're finally here. We're going to do it. So I can't wait to talk about it. So before we get started, though, I want to say thank you to all of our Patreon members. If you're interested in Patreon, you can hit the link up here this way now because I moved it. There's a QR code. You can scan that, or you can just head out to cantinacast.com/Patreon and sign up there. But we've got a new member. So BA from BA has joined the We Are All the Republic tier. So thank you so much for joining that tier. I want to say a shout out to all of our now part of the tribe members. That's Alex, Danny, Dante, Daz. I've got a Brad Feeling, Jackson, Jacob, Josh, Mike Borda, Paisley, Reader Reborn, Sharkman Dan, Uncle Leon, and Will I Am. And then our Delusions of Grandeur members, which are now This Is Rod Racing, Steve, and Rob. So Rob's with us tonight. Paisley's with us. Alex is in the chat. One Up versus ZPU is in the chat as well. Thank you guys for joining for the live recording. Let's see. One other thing. Show's coming up. So tomorrow night, we had to shift everything by a day. So tomorrow night will be episode 646, and we're going to do the final hype for Maul Shadow Lord. So that's where we're going to get into everything that's happened over the last probably 2-3 weeks now. We've got teasers, we've got trailers, there's interviews. We've got a lot more information about the show. We're going to give you all of that, do the tail of the tape, talk about how many episodes, the breakdowns, that sort of thing. We'll end the show by talking about predictions, things that we hope to happen, things that we think are going to happen, things that we know are probably going to happen. And then it'll all culminate in our Razor Crest moment there at the very end. So that's tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Central. It's a public show. That'll be for everybody. This Sunday, will be a Patreon exclusive. And it's going to be another old school type Cantina Cast episode. We're going to actually talk about balance of the Force. Again, another topic that has come up many, many times in the show. I know we've had a couple of shows where I think Utini was on, and we were talking about balance of the Force, but we didn't really kind of break that down or dissect it to the way we're going to on Sunday's show. So that'll be talking about balance of the Force. What does it mean? The different interpretations. We'll talk about what George Lucas thinks balance of the Force is, as well as a number of other people that have spoken about the topic. So again, that'll be a lot of fun. Patreon exclusive. That'll be 9 p.m. on Sunday. And then that next Tuesday, so a week from today, we're in it, right? Maul Shadow Lord. We've got 2 episodes coming out Monday night at midnight. That Tuesday night, we'll come back and do a full breakdown. So not sure how long that episode's going to be. It'll probably clock in somewhere around 2 hours, similar to what we used to do with the Ahsoka episodes when they were doing that. So that'll be a public show. We'll do a full breakdown of both episodes 1 and 2 Tuesday night. And that's next Tuesday. So please tune in for that one. And before we get started, if you haven't already done so, please like this episode if you don't mind. Feel free to comment down below. And if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. That way you guys get all the episodes that come out whenever we put them on YouTube, whenever we go live or do anything else. So thank you again, everyone, for your support. Okay.
Thank you.
With the business out of the way, let's talk about is the dark side stronger? So what I want to do is kind of start off by let's talk about that scene. Let's talk about the context in which that question is asked by Luke Skywalker. And then I'm just gonna, I kind of want you to kind of maybe give us your interpretation. Maybe you can just talk about what that scene means to you, your first time watching it, whatever you want. But let's talk about it. So Yoda says, and this is, now mind you, this happens on Dagobah. Yoda has just started his training. The scene before this with Yoda and Luke is where he says, you will be, talking about how he's not afraid. And then we cut over to the asteroid field inside the space slug thing. And then we come over here and we're kind of brought right into the training. And we can see Luke is doing his flips and he's, really, he's sweating everywhere and going to the physical paces of what that Jedi Knight training looks like. And we get Yoda saying, a Jedi strength flows from the Force, but beware of the dark side. Anger, fear, aggression. The dark side of the Force are they. Easily they flow, quick to join you in a fight. If once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny. Consume you it will, as it did Obi-Wan's apprentice. That's when Luke turns and says Vader. And then he says, is the dark side stronger? Yoda is very quick to say, no, it's not. He says, no, quicker, easier, more seductive. And then they get into the whole conversation about how will I know the good side from the bad? And, when you're at peace, that kind of thing. And while that's important, I do find it interesting that Luke asked this question here and now in that moment. I wonder if it was because he's a Skywalker, right?
Right.
So for me, it feels like a part of it is the dark side is appealing to him or coming to him as equally, maybe even more powerfully than the light side is, right? So he's feeling both of them on that planet, Dagobah, with his teaming with the Force that it is. I would assume that he is able to feel it. I mean, we've got the cave there on Dagobah as well, but something prompted him for that, right? And I guess, what are your thoughts on maybe that? And I guess, how did you interpret the scene? I guess even long ago, or even now as we prepared for the show.
So I would say, obviously, watching it when I was 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, I have a different interpretation of it than what I do today, right? As a grown up or an adult or whatever you want to call it. Back then, I thought he was afraid. I honestly thought he asked because he was afraid would he ever be able to conquer the dark side, and in this case, i.e., Vader. Again, at this point he has no idea that Vader is his father. I think he asks out of fear. When I was younger, that's what I thought, that he was afraid and he wanted some assurance from Yoda that the dark side is not more powerful than the light. Moving forward, I think I honestly think that he asks because he feels the pull and he has concern. And like you mentioned earlier, Albert, it's something that was weighing on him. So he wanted guidance at that moment to say, hey, is this going to be something that I can even try to resist? Is it stronger? And then Yoda came back with the perfect answer. No, I think the last piece the last item that he used to describe it, more seductive, essentially saying, hey, Luke, if you allow it to seduce you, you will fall. That's the one thing you have to avoid. And then we see obviously in the confrontation with Vader in Empire, and then move to Return of the Jedi, we see that temptation, that seduction kind of play a role in Luke, deciding whether he's going to join the dark side or stay with the light. And ultimately he realized, this is a seduction tactic. I'm not going to fall for it. And then, he says, throws his lightsaber away like he does in Last Jedi and says, hey, you lost, you've lost. I'm a Jedi. So I think that now the whole that whole scene of the questioning of, is the dark side stronger? I think now I see as an adult how it plays later on in Empire and then through Return of the Jedi.
Yeah. I think both are still true. All right. Maybe not to the full extent, but I think both can be true. Like you can feel.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that would be, again, we have no proof of this, but just talking about where I mentioned where the last scene we see Luke and Yoda just talking is him saying, I'm not afraid. And Yoda saying, you will be. And then, I don't know what kind of training went into that at that point, but he's probably broken down physically, emotionally. The Force is teaming there with him. And he's starting to have kind of doubts, like maybe I am afraid, like maybe Yoda was right. So I think that's a legit kind of explanation as to why he asked the question.
Mhm.
Again, to your point, I feel like that's probably not all of it. Maybe that's just a small portion of it, where the majority of it really comes from is trying to feel like whether or not this is going to be something. Can I even do this? Right? Is the
Right.
light side stronger? Am I running down a fool's errand? I mean, he's got to know at this point that the Jedi are all gone. So that's got to put doubt in his mind too. Like, hey,
Mhm.
if the light side is so strong, why the heck am I the last Jedi? At least that he knows and Yoda knows at that point, right? That doesn't bode well. They got wiped out by one single student, his father, or doesn't know it's his father yet. But a single person went out and wiped out all these Jedi.
Mhm.
That's got to put a lot of doubt in your mind, thinking, did I choose the right team here? Like, is this may not go well for me if I learn the light side of things.
And see that same doubt, that makes perfect sense, Albert, because that same doubt is what clouded him during the sequel trilogy.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
the doubt came in and he's like, you know what? I'm leaving it all because he probably felt like he made the wrong decision.
Yeah.
But yeah, I totally agree with you. Both things can be true. And it probably, honestly, they probably are. It's a little bit of concern, it's a little bit of confusion, and then also just straight out fear of, is this something that I'm going to be able to conquer?
Yeah. I think when we get to the very end of this analysis, when we talk about whether or not one is stronger than the other, we do have to keep in mind that George Lucas has unequivocally talked about what he feels is, which is stronger, right? And when you take that and when you look at that and you look at the quote, the line just before that, where he says, if once you start down the dark side path, forever will it dominate your destiny. There's a whole nother topic that we can do talking about destiny and free will
Mhm.
and that sort of thing, right? But that really ties into George Lucas's explanation, and that really kind of then plays into it's really. I know I said this, I teased this when we were talking about this. We were going to be doing this episode, but some of it does come down to a certain point of view. It comes
Right.
down to what is stronger in that eye of the beholder. So let's segue into that, because this quote really says, "Is the dark side stronger?" What does stronger mean? There are a couple different ways I think you could define stronger. I think if you're the Jedi, you define it in certain terms. If you're if
Mhm.
you're a Sith or part of the dark side, you certainly define it in very different terms. Um, but I think for intents and purposes, it's probably safe to say that in the context of this quote, what he's really asking is the dark side more powerful?
Powerful.
Yeah,
Exactly.
right.
Yep. Mhm.
And powerful. There's a lot of quotes where power is being like powerful is being used in reference to the Force. I want to get into some of that here in just a second. Well, let's talk about let's talk about it right now, actually. So one of the first ones is Vader. Vader actually he does this in I think twice actually, if I'm not mistaken. But Vader has a quote in Episode 4. Kenobi has a quote in Episode 4 where they're talking about the Force. Vader's isn't specifically about the dark side, which I find interesting. I know why, because it was the first one written, but it is interesting when you try to retcon this or try to make sense of it all. But he says the ability to destroy an entire planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force. So he's agnostically talking about the Force here. He's not saying light side. He's not saying dark side. There was really no concept at that point, at least from the script. Maybe in George's head, we didn't get all that light side, dark side stuff until we get to Empire Strikes Back.
Right. Exactly.
Right. But he's definitely talking about how the Force is more powerful than being able to destroy an entire planet. He could have been talking about in the context of, Luke Sky or somebody like a one man person. Like, I don't think he was talking about this specifically, but the Force is going to do what the Force does. Right. If that means it's going to allow a single pilot on a X-wing to fire a $1 in a billion chance in firing that proton torpedo down into the hole there and blowing up the Death Star, he could have already been talking about that. Right? You can't rule anything out ever with the Force because it is that powerful. Right? In that context, I think it makes sense. Maybe he's talking about Han's change of heart. Maybe he's talking about the guidance of Kenobi. Right? Never putting past the fact that the Jedi are able to do some amazing things that the Sith haven't ever been able to do. I think he's just speaking in those broad terms of like, you can't rule anything out ever with the Force. And so even though we've got this amazing space station that can destroy an entire planet, it could easily crumble should the will of the Force will it, or someone with the Force come in and decide that they want to kind of take it down.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what he mentioned the Force agnostically a couple of times, like Kenobi is here, the Force is with him, and then like the Force is strong with him when he was referring to Luke when they were in the trench together. He referred to the Force agnostically in those areas in that time in the film.
Yeah.
You're right. The only time we hear the dark side is, in Kenobi's hut on Tatooine, where he's talking to Luke about, his father. And he said Vader was seduced by the dark side of the Force. And then that's kind of where we kind of leave it, right? Until we get to Empire Strikes Back. But what happens in A New Hope is kind of, I know, there's a play on, does destiny run your life? Do you have free will, or is it a combination of both? And I think what happens in A New Hope is we have Luke who utilizes the Force to essentially make a 1 in a million shot.
Yeah.
But I do believe we also have the Force that brings back Han Solo to give Luke the assist. I've always believed that. I have never, ever thought any other way. Even when I was a child, I always thought that it was the Force willing or at least guiding Han to come back, because he knew it was the right thing to do. And again,
and he would never admit that it was the Force, right?
No,
but
never. He probably wouldn't even know. Honestly, you know what I mean? As being a non-believer, obviously he changed his tune by the time we get to The Force Awakens.
Yeah,
but initially, when we first meet him, he's like, he called, in The Force Awakens, he said he used to refer to it as mumbo jumbo.
Yeah.
So I honestly believe that it was the Force that gave Han the push to come back. Because if he didn't come back, Luke doesn't succeed.
Right.
Luke is shot down. But the combination of Luke using the Force to hit that amazing shot, and then Han coming in with the assist to clear the TIE fighters out of his way, and Vader, I think that was the Force's will to come back and essentially destroy that battle station, which essentially proves what Vader was saying in the boardroom previously, don't underestimate the Force.
Yep.
And I like how that all comes together. The one thing that I want to, kind of talk about when we get to maybe closer to the end is how I think this kind of, by the end of the Skywalker saga, I believe there is proof that the light side is definitely stronger. But that's something that we can get to near the end.
Okay. All right. Throwing down the gauntlet. All right.
Yeah. I thought about this for years, but then when this topic came up so that we could talk about tonight, I kind of revisited that thought. And I want to bring that little note up, see if people agree with me.
You've been waiting for a long time for this.
I have. Yes.
Yeah. All right. So what we were just talking about was that Vader kind of speaks about the Force, the power of the Force, but it's agnostic during episode 4. By the time we get to episode 5, he's definitely doubling down on the dark side. He's, at one point he tells Luke, you don't understand the power of the dark side, right? He actually calls it out and says that. You don't realize the power of the dark side. So it gets a little bit more defined there, and I think that's just because of the way the writing was going back and forth. But going back to episode 4, Kenobi talks about the power of the Force as well when he says, if you strike me down, I should become more powerful than you possibly imagine. That's a whole nother topic as well. Like we could spend some time on that one. There's a couple different ways you could interpret that. I don't think any one way is right or wrong. But, I think from his perspective, at least for all the context that we have now, especially the canon type stuff, the stories that have come out afterwards, the training with Obi-Wan, the training with Qui-Gon passing down that training to Yoda, and then Yoda passing down that to Kenobi. And then we see Kenobi and Qui-Gon at the end of the Kenobi series together for the first time as, Force Ghosts and living being and all that. That's, in my opinion, that's what he was really talking about, is like, I'm going to transcend this living body, and I'm always going to be with Luke, and I'm always going to be there to help train him and guide him, and there's nothing you'll ever be able to do about that. Even back in episode 4 days, that's how I always interpreted. There's all kinds of interpretations there, but that is a strong case for why the light side is stronger. I know. So I'm not. I'm going to leave Legends out of this because in Legends there were a couple of Sith lords who were able to become quote Force ghosts. They were kind of a little different. I think there was only two that I recall.
Which, by the way, back when Legends was EU before Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney, he said he didn't like that.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. But
he said he didn't like the fact that, of course, he didn't do anything about it, but
right. Yeah.
He said he didn't like that. But obviously, we didn't see any of that in any of the canon material at the time, which was at the time was the 6 Star Wars movies and the Clone Wars cartoon. Although there was a moment in Clone Wars where I believe it was Darth Bane came back reanimated.
Sure.
Not necessarily a Force ghost,
right,
but reanimated. And I think based on what Filoni said about that is that was a one-time thing he could do, that he was powerful in the dark side, but he wasn't going to be able to do that again. That was his one shot to come in and try to influence the Force in real life from the netherworld of the Force. After that, he was done. He didn't have enough power. But Jedi who are at peace, who accept the will of the Force, who fall to the will of the Force, like Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, Yoda, they're able to come and go as they please because they're within that power. So those are the, I think the canon is, Sith can't do that.
Yeah,
because they're not at peace. You have to be at peace, and they're not, obviously, right? Obviously, they have other ways to come back, somehow,
right? Yeah,
but from what I've heard Pablo Hidalgo say, what I've heard Filoni say is that the Sith are not able to do that because they are not. Essentially, they're not powerful enough because they're not at peace.
Right, and that's in line with what. That's certainly in line with what they've given us since Disney took over. It's been canon. The Sith have come back, and by back I mean they're tethered. They don't have free will. They can't just kind of come and go as they please and sit on a log, and talk to Luke and have a conversation, or Yoda sitting down with Luke Skywalker and the Last Jedi sitting there talking about the temple. Right? They just can't do any of that. No. They're usually confined or tormented, right? They come back as possession. Like if you think about Momin, Momin was one of those characters he had possessed a mask, and when they put the mask on, Momin came back, and he was trying to find a way back. But once the mask was off, and that's the whole what was it? The comic book that came out. That's as far as I got. Shadow of the Sith, same thing. The Sith Lord from that one was confined to a certain area. They couldn't really do anything. So there's a big key differentiator there between being a Force ghost and being a Force entity or a Force spirit or a Force poltergeist, right? They're almost cursed and condemned, whereas I think the other guys can walk in and just, have free will.
Right, exactly. That's a perfect analogy. It's essentially, like you said, a poltergeist, and poltergeists are normally confined to an object or a building, residence, whatever. Right. I mean, if we've all seen the movie, we understand. But where near a spirit, you have that free will to just kind of roam. I mean, I know some people think of spirits as they're also confined, but I'm of the other belief that if you're a spirit, you're able to come and go as you please. You're not tethered to a relic or to a location. You are essentially your own sentient spirit, I guess you would say. But I would like you said, it's more of a curse. It's like the Sith that end up, being a part of a relic, being confined to a relic, or like you said, the mask or whatnot. That's a curse because they can never find peace like that. And I think, not that they're actually looking for peace, but it kind of just keeps them going in that same mindset as they were when they were alive. They were just about conquest and power and obtaining more power. Well, if that's your mindset, you're never going to be at peace. So, you don't rest. You're essentially cursed to be unrestful for the rest of eternity. I know that's a lot of theoretical stuff there and whatnot, but again, that's just the amount of thought I've given to it when it comes to things like this. Like, what can the Jedi do and what can the Sith do from within the Force?
Yeah, and we're going to get into that next. Actually, we'll talk about abilities because it all goes back to defining again what is the dark side stronger? Well, how do you define stronger? Is it power? And if it's power, what are the different types of powers that are out there? And so we've talked about force ghosts. The dark side specifically, they have force lightning. Now, there have been some instances, even in canon, where we've seen force lightning. Rey does it in Rise of Skywalker when she takes down the transport and thinks she's killed Chewbacca. But force lightning is something that is it's super powerful. Like we saw the effects on Vader, we saw the effects on Luke, we've seen the effects on Maul when he was being tortured. We've seen the effects on Dooku. We've seen Dooku kill Ventress with the force lightning. There's tons and tons of examples where we've seen that, yet we've never seen the light side use that. What I would say is at least they've never really truly gone into the details of it all. I think in Legends, it was, they were channeling their hate to their fingertips, and that was the lightning itself. But even as powerful that is, we still have to keep in mind that when Dooku uses it in Attack of the Clones, what does Yoda do? He literally gathers that up into a ball and just like snuffs it out.
Yeah, like he snuffed,
like
snuff
no
out
big
a candle.
deal, right?
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, that was a huge, powerful moment. I remember when that happened. I remember watching that in the theater and people cheering, not even knowing what was coming next when that little monkey started jumping around all over the place, right? but that was just like the precursor to it all. So you could argue that even though that may be really powerful, and it's a case for how the dark side is stronger. There are people like Yoda out there who are way more powerful and can just absorb that or dissipate it. And so that kind of negates it, right? It really just kind of comes down to how powerful or how strong you are in the Force personally.
Exactly. And also, I haven't seen anything that tells me in this situation one way or another, but the ability to block force lightning with the lightsaber, is it the mechanics of the lightsaber that block the force lightning, or do you use the lightsaber as like a tool to amplify your force power because maybe you can't catch it and snuff it out like Yoda? I mean, because not everyone hardly any Jedi is as powerful as Yoda, maybe Mace Windu, but is it the actual mechanics, the technology of the lightsaber that absorbs the Sith lightning, or do they use the Force do they use the lightsaber as like a magnifier for the Force? So even though they're not as powerful as Yoda or Mace Windu, they can still block Force lightning because he blocked Dooku's Force lightning initially, with his lightsaber.
You're talking about Kenobi.
Kenobi,
right?
And then we see Mace Windu do it with Sidious when they're out. They're out there fighting out there by the window. Obviously, he doesn't catch it like Yoda. We do see Yoda catch it, but unlike catching it and snuffing it out with Dooku, he was kind of really just deflecting it. That just shows you how much more powerful Palpatine or Darth Sidious was. Yoda wasn't able to just snuff it out. He was just really able to deflect it.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and I think, and I could be wrong on here. I think what I've always read or interpreted was that their lightsaber acts as kind of like a lightning rod. You know? I mean, they've got a channel. It's not anybody can just hold up a lightsaber and is attracted to it. I think there's some kind of force, power, ability where you're so in tune with the kyber crystal itself that you can make it turn into somewhat like a lightning rod, right? It's a defense that the Jedi have learned. Sith have learned it too. I should say that, at least in Legends. There were abilities where the Sith would do it. So it was not specific to one or the other. But it required a certain amount of like training and discipline and, prowess in the Force.
Right.
It wasn't just something that anybody could do.
And, Obi-Wan at that, he wasn't no slouch. He was a pretty revered Jedi Knight based off, and especially after Dooku gave him props. Like, I thought, Qui-Gon spoke so highly of you,
Right.
So we knew that he had the Jedi arts chops to at least accomplish that. Again, not powerful enough to absorb it and snuff it out, but essentially, like you said, use the lightsaber as a, like a lightning rod to absorb it. I wanted to ask you, Albert, because I know you're more into novels and comic books, and I don't know if this particular force power ended up in Legends or if it was in canon books that it came up. It was essentially the Jedi's form of Force lightning, but it was called Force Judgment, where the lightning is not blue, but it's a yellow tint, and it's nowhere near as deadly as powerful as Sith lightning is. But it was used more to like incapacitate somebody versus potentially killing them, like you could with Sith lightning. Are you familiar with that at all?
Yeah,
Because again, I've only read a little bit, and I didn't know if it was Legends or if it's in current canon.
Legends only. Canon has really stayed away from this whole idea. They've kind of made Force lightning exclusive to the dark side. I'm not going to say Sith because again, Rey used it, but because of her dyad and she channeled her anger, that kind of thing. It was a kind of a one-off thing. If you look at some of the old Republic video games, and I know for a fact, like SWTOR, some of the light side, you have that ability that you're talking about where it stuns and incapacitates. It doesn't kill, right? It's
right.
Nicer. But yeah, they've never brought that over into canon. So,
okay.
I do want to say one other thing tue, though, as far as like the Force lightning, like, we've gotten, by the time we get to the Rise of Skywalker, everything is like so over the top, and I get it, right? It's just the way the movie was. But if you think about what Palpatine does, that was a display that I don't know that Yoda could have been able to stop, right? You think about what he's doing. He's channeling the dark side and he creates this Force lightning storm that suddenly jettisons up into the space there above them and takes out like tons and tons of ships, right?
Right.
I mean, that was kind of
exactly.
showing you just how powerful he was. So I know we just said like, okay, Force lightning's not that powerful. Yoda was able to snuff it out. Palpatine was kind of at a different level. Like he was really, next level. He kind of evolved, I guess, at that point and was able to do something that I don't know that we've ever seen. We've never seen it in canon. I'm trying to think of examples in Legends where we've seen something that powerful, at least with Force lightning anyways. So would Yoda have been able to stop something like that? I don't know. I'd almost argue no. I don't know that he could have, especially during his age, maybe in his prime. Or maybe there were other Jedi, maybe in Legends that could have done it. Some of the people during the High Republic era come to mind that would have found ways to kind of put that down or extinguish it. But you can't rule that out. You can't say that Force lightning isn't as powerful because it just was a whole different level with Palpatine taking down ships and the amount he was conducting was kind of crazy at that point.
I guess then the question is, was he giving all of that amount of power when he threw his Force lightning at Rey for the last time? And now keep in mind, I know it wasn't Rey herself blocking it with the two sabers. It was all the Jedi, right? But ultimately it took her life, right?
Yeah.
So was he giving it all like he was when he did the Force lightning storm, or was he just given, like he would any other individual person, like, Yoda, Mace Windu, Luke, or was he giving her the full power? I like to think that he was giving her the full power.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, if she had to have all the Jedi step in to help, take him down and deflect that or absorb it, yeah, it feels like she's going to have to call upon much more than herself in her training.
Exactly. Going back to that moment of when he threw up his hands and the Force storm happened, I think that was probably one of the better scenes in Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah.
Not to mention, I thought that was the sound effect that surrounded that boom, when he threw the lightning up. That was probably the best sound effect to come out of
Rise of Skywalker.
The Rise of Skywalker. Yeah.
Yeah. In the chat, Paisley says, yes, that's how I saw The Force Awakens too. The Force was so powerful. And One Up says, with Avar Jedi networking. Yes. So she's exactly who I was talking about when I said there were probably Jedi during the High Republic that arguably could have been able to stop this, but she would have still needed her, some of the abilities that she demonstrated during that series as well. Okay, so those are okay. So we've talked about Force lightning. We've talked about Force ghosts. We've talked about resurrection, sort of. We actually haven't touched on that. I mean, and this is where it really comes down to. And we're going to provide some more examples here in a second. But what it really comes down to is when you look at the perspectives of the Jedi and the Sith. A lot of times, or almost every time, the Sith are completely consumed and really look at being stronger, powerful, meaning being able to dominate people, being selfish and taking everything that you want whenever you want. But then it always comes back to the preservation of life, right? Immortality, life eternal. what Palpatine was after, so many other Sith are always after, whether it was Plagueis or, what was his master before him? But they've always been consumed with this idea of like extending their life. We talked about
Right.
Momin. We talked about the Sith Lord from the Shadow of the Sith novel.
Right.
That's really what it's about. It's about life preservation.
Exactly.
And this is what, and it even goes back to Anakin Skywalker, right? Because by the time he finds out,
yep.
yeah, I mean, that's exactly what led us down this whole path, was him fearful that he was going to lose Padme. And so therefore he had to learn how to preserve life, which is something that is absolutely not, which is taboo for the Jedi, but absolutely wide open. And, everything's game, everything's fair, everything's, free with the Sith and the dark side. That, yeah, come on over. We can show you how to preserve life, even though I'd argue that Palpatine really didn't know how to do it. But that's really what kind of helped him kind of fall to the dark side.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that this, one of the sad things about, the tragedy of Darth Vader is that he succumbed to the dark. He became this Sith Lord, the most hated man in the galaxy, to save his wife. And he didn't even come close. I don't think he ever was even given an opportunity, even when he went out to search for it himself, to find that. And that goes to what I was talking about earlier on why I think, because of certain points that happened throughout the entire Skywalker saga, and then we get to the end, we can kind of see why the light side is stronger.
Yeah. Well, yes. No, I get where you're going with that too, because, and I think that's, well, we'll save it. Because, again, it all plays into what kind of George Lucas's take on whether or not the light side was stronger or the dark side was. But yeah, that preservation of life, again, depending on your point of view, depending on what you see as power, that could be it. For the Jedi, they weren't so up on preserving life. I think it was, it's kind of a slippery slope when you think about it. Rey's able to do it. When we get to the Rise of Skywalker, she does it. In the novel, it clearly calls out her saving the snake down in the cave or whatever. We know that Ben Solo transfers his life into Rey to kind of bring her back to life. That's a very selfless act, that he does by giving his own life so that she can live. And that's why he becomes a Force ghost, or a Force entity in the book anyways. We don't see that in the movie, but in the book, he still is kind of ghost and talking to her and all that. So it's definitely something that, the Jedi try to stay away from, because when you think about it, it can be a slippery slope, right? If a Jedi suddenly learned and started to use this ability of being able to heal, force heal, where does that natural path go? Where does it naturally conclude? It concludes in the preservation of life. It naturally concludes into life eternal, life immortal, which is you're playing with the dark side at that point, right? You're going down that dark side path. It's going to take over your destiny. And so that's why they kind of put a hard stop on it and said, this is just not something that we do. When you look at Legends and some of the old EU stuff, it was happening all the time. Right. Even back in the old 1980s role-playing game, even one of the Jedi powers you could learn was like Force Heal, and you could transfer your health over to somebody else, and there was no consequences for it. But yeah, when you look at it through the lens of, light side versus dark, destiny, the seduction of the dark side, it kind of makes sense to me, at least, that this isn't something that the Jedi would be kind of up on. And so from that perspective, I think it's definitely powerful. But you have to argue then again that the Jedi have another way of preserving life that seems much more kosher in the Force Ghost that we talked about earlier.
Right. And I think the preservation of life from a Sith's perspective is its own. I need to be able to survive. I need to be immortal. It's a little bit different with Anakin. Anakin came to it with the perspective of a Jedi, but he didn't have the understanding to know that that's just not the way. The Sith is not the way. The Sith, whatever Palpatine was telling him about, stopping people from dying, that was the term. That's just not the way. And like I said, the tragedy about it, the sad thing, he never got close to that during his entire time as Vader. Whereas, yes, the Jedi, their mission is the preservation of life, but not through a means that's supernatural, i.e., a force based type of way. It's, hey, if you're in trouble, if your life is in danger, if your life is threatened, I'll put myself before you so that you survive, but that I may perish.
Mm-hmm.
They live a selfless life for others. And, Anakin said it beautifully in Revenge of the Sith when he was talking to Palpatine about the Jedi. He understands, and that's another thing that, makes Anakin's fall just so sad, is that he understands, but he's at the mercy of his desire to save his wife. And he just doesn't know that it's all a manipulation tactic.
Yeah.
But yeah, I as far as the force healing and whatnot, I am happy that we got a glimpse of force healing in The Mandalorian when Grogu heals Grief Karga when he's bitten by those bat things that attack him.
Yeah.
And he says the infection is going, and Grogu comes up and heals him, because that is a good segue to what Rey did.
And they came out right around the same time, within a week of each other, if I remember correctly.
Exactly. I think that was perfect timing, because honestly, I would have not been able to accept what Rey did in The Rise of Skywalker if I did not see what Grogu did before.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was just a lot more subtle, the way that Grogu went about healing grief versus, okay, here's this monster with this huge gaging gash in its body, and she goes to heal it. I was able to accept it because I saw what happened in The Mandalorian and what Grogu did.
Yeah.
But yeah,
that was controversial. Like
it was
for us. I remember when we covered that, we had people come back and say, this is stupid. This is, Jedi should never do that. The argument was technically, and I'm not an apologist, I'm just saying technically Grogu's not a Jedi. He hadn't been trained really.
Right.
That was just a natural ability that he had. And there's something about the innocence. And this is my interpretation. I think this is how I explained it. With Grogu, it was kind of an innocence thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a kid who has the power, they're very selfless in what they're trying to do. They just want to help other people. Kids are just naturally helpful in that way. And so there was something very innocent about it. You could argue with Rey, same thing. She's a pet lover. She has empathy, and she's sympathetic towards animals and all beings. And so that was coming from a selfless place. And I think as long as it stays within those confines, I think it's fine. But I still would argue that that is a slippery slope, right? It takes a certain individual to kind of do that, with that, to have that discipline, to not go down the path of like, wow, I was able to do that. Maybe I can do more. The way they kind of explain this, though, too, I do want to call this out. In The Rise of Skywalker, I think it was in the novel. Yeah, it wasn't a novel. Without explicitly saying so, they do mention that when Rey gives over a part of her to heal, part of her dies, which is why we see Ben Solo completely dead, because he gives all of his life to transfer over to her. So there is a downside to doing it, right? So they've kind of put some guardrails on it a little bit now, the way they're kind of defining this, and which we never had before in EU. But so that is a good point to call out, that if we do see Rey in the next movie, or we fast forward 25 years from now, and now the Jedi are totally all about force healing, and relationships are totally fine, right? There's all kinds of things that could be changing as a result of all this down the road. It is going to take a lot of discipline, I think, for that to be successful. Otherwise, they're just going to repeat a lot of those falls that they've had over the years, thousands of years now, which got them to the dogma that they are in by the time we get to the Phantom Menace.
And I kind of agree with that. I mean, and even within the Star Wars galaxy, I think the whole healing thing was still taboo, even from a light side Jedi perspective. Paisley brought up in the chat that in season 2 of Andor, there was a force healer, right? Yeah. But if you notice, the attitude toward a force healer was very skeptical. And especially from Cassian, who didn't want anything to do with her because he was just so skeptical of the ability of the force to heal somebody, right? Ultimately, while she didn't heal him per se, was able to give him some insight that actually helped him moving forward. But yeah, I think I can see that what a natural progression would be, when we see Rey next, which, because there's no doubt she's going to come back. We're going to see her in a movie. I just don't know when and where. But I would like to see aspects of that introduced into what the Jedi are taught, because now it's become, because of Grogu, because of Rey, because of Ben Solo's sacrifice, it's become part of the, how can I say it? It's on the shelf of potential force powers that Jedi can use. And then, we have to keep in mind, and I have to really thank the writers of Ahsoka, because they brought up this term, and we've talked about it previously in the show, and that's Boken Jedi, which was mentioned by Balin Skoll in season 1 of Ahsoka, that they're Jedi in the sense that they practice the being Jedi and utilizing the light side of the Force, but they are not trained like the traditional Jedi were in the Old Republic, New Republic, essentially being trained out of the temple. They are not trained like that. It's essentially a master training an apprentice the way they feel like they need to be trained. So whereas maybe healing, using the Force to heal, was considered taboo, not really discussed, not really taught from a Jedi's perspective back in the older days when, the temple stood and the Jedi Order was full and powerful. Now it could be something that is very, very acceptable. Again,
yeah, right.
These Jedi are being taught by masters that are teaching them what they think they need to know, not necessarily what an order is telling them they need to teach. So I think it'd be absolutely acceptable to have that in the next generation of Jedi. I just hope they address it, because now it's become part of the new Jedi lexicon, and I just think it would have to be addressed.
Yeah, and so the way I would put a button on this is, since we're talking about whether or not talking about the power, whether one is powerful than the other. Historically, traditionally, the Sith had the ability to force heal, preserve life. We'll get into some other examples here in a second when we talk about some real world examples from the movies. But it's something that's becoming more, it's open now. We're starting to see a change in there, right? These new Boken Jedi are more flexible. They don't have the dogma of the Jedi Order and the disciplines and all that. And that could be a good thing and it could be a bad thing, right? If suddenly they built an entire order of these things, then I would assume that some of those same missteps are going to happen. And that's why the Jedi get to the way they are by the time we get to the Force Awakens or to the Phantom Menace. But yeah, it would be cool to kind of see this new renaissance of Force sensitive folks, not necessarily Jedi. I don't even think they would call themselves Jedi. But they go into this new era of Force sensitives that are being trained. Would be great to see that. And so that kind of negates, his tradition. Because now we would see technically Force or light side users being able to do Force healing or preserve life in some ways.
Right. Mm-hmm.
There's one that's very subtle. And I'm not trying to be coy here or anything, but when you talk about whether or not the dark side is stronger, I think there's an argument to be made when you just look at Sheev Palpatine and what he was able to do by taking over the Republic. I mean, he played a very, very long game. He had the dark side at his side. He manipulated, everyone in the galaxy, from the everyday people to senators to the Jedi Council to Anakin Skywalker. Jar Jar. There's something to be said about just the power of, maybe not as thrilling as it may sound, but the power of the politics and the negotiating and the manipulation and the controlling of people, social manipulation that he was doing. Almost all of that was fueled by his own selfishness, right? He wanted all of this stuff. So, it's not sexy. It's not something that we can break down and talk about lightsaber fights, but I think there's a good argument to be made that Palpatine was pretty powerful. The dark side was pretty powerful in the sense that it was able to overtake an entire republic and turn it into the Galactic Empire for, in the context of the Star Wars timeline, not a whole long time. It's not a very long time, but it was significant. He was the absolute power for quite a number of years there.
Yep. No, and that's something that we talked about, like a power that the Sith have within the dark side of the Force. And that's the ability to manipulate not just individuals, but, whole bodies of people or the environment that they're in. I think Palpatine did a good job of manipulating the environment, to cause a trade dispute, which led to an invasion, which led to XYZ, which led to Clone Wars, which led to the fall of the Jedi, which led to him being emperor. He used the Force to manipulate a lot of important people, a lot of very smart people, not to mention the Jedi Order themselves. And to show how powerful he was, I mean, in Attack of the Clones, where, I kind of laugh every time he asks, because he knows the answer to this. But when Palpatine asks Yoda, do you really think this is going to come to war? I'm like, come on, man. But anyway, right. He's like, impossible to see the future is. The dark side clouds everything. Yeah, Palpatine knows that. He wants to hear it from you.
Yeah,
and that just shows you how powerful he is. When someone as powerful and as in tune with the Force as Yoda cannot foresee what's going to happen. That is one of the Sith's major power, or I should say, it's one of Darth Sidious's major power and what he really relied on to get to where he wanted to get to, playing that long game.
Yeah. So we've talked about, so I talked about taking over the Republic. I don't know that we have any examples for this, but I think, when you talk about whether it's stronger, when Yoda says that it's quicker, faster, and then, we talked about the more seductive piece, which we'll get into more here in a little bit, because that really plays into George Lucas's thoughts on whether or not one's are stronger than the other. But the quick to learning, we don't necessarily have good examples of this in canon. In Legends, we do, because the more emotion that you show, the quicker you can become powerful, and the more powerful you do become, whether that it's your abilities, your ability to block, your ability to strike, you're reacting purely on rage and emotion. There's something to be said there that's legit. Like, we know that to be the case. The best example, maybe, and I guess we can start segueing into this. I want to talk about some of these examples that we've seen on screen where suddenly someone taps into the dark side and they become more powerful than they have been. The best example that I would say here is probably with Luke fighting Vader in Return of the Jedi.
Exactly,
he's playing the Jedi role to a T, very disciplined, not striking out in anger. He's hiding. He's being more of a pacifist. And then what happens? Vader starts doing dark side stuff, right? He's throwing his lightsaber and all that stuff, but that's really not bothering Luke, right? That doesn't really get to him. What gets to him is saying that, hey, if you won't turn to the dark side, then maybe your sister will. Now that taps into his emotion. And then we get that one of the best scenes, in my opinion, of Star Wars, where, we get the music, the chorus going, and, they're kind of the camera's panning left to right or right to left. And Luke is just going at Vader, and he's going at him. It's becoming much more fierce, much more intense. And by the time we get to the very end there, I mean, he's got Vader. Now, granted, Vader's a little bit older now, and he's had a lot of battles, and needs some oil every once in a while.
Yeah,
but I mean, he's like, but I mean, he's beating the crap out of him to the point where he's got Vader finally, falling, clutching, holding on to that railing, and then just starts wailing away. And you can see it in Luke's face. You can see how angry he is because he's, worried about his sister, or maybe he's seen during that moment, he sees a vision of what Vader's actually talking about. And so he's trying to extinguish this as quickly as possible, and, ends up with lobbing off his arm. And Palpatine confirms all that, right? He says, your hate has made you, powerful. Your hate has made you powerful. And that's when Luke realizes, like, oh crap, he's right. I totally I gave into it. That's a good example of where we see that dark side coming in and elevating somebody's abilities to a new level. So your thoughts on that? I have like one other one that I maybe not. I think it's up to interpretation, but I guess, what do you think about, I guess, that particular scene? Anything I missed there in terms of like, the dark side becoming an ally in such way?
I think that's probably the best example during the whole, through the whole saga of someone when their emotions take over versus, I guess you could say, logic, the right thing to do. Their emotions take over. That's the cue for the dark side to come in. And that's exactly what happened with Luke. And I do believe he utilized the dark side in that moment to overpower Vader. And there was nothing Vader could do. I thought probably the most poetic moment, again, to show, and this is not what I was alluding to earlier, but this just shows that the light side does, I do believe, is more powerful than the dark. He was ready to, take him out. Palpatine says, good, take, strike your father down, take his place at my side. And then he takes a look at his hand and he sees Vader's, the hand that he severed off Vader. And he's like, I am becoming him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is when he's able to realize that he was able to let go of the rage and be consumed by the light side again. And then the reason why I say that is because after that scene where he looks at his hand, he sees, the shot of him looking at Vader's hand, he like exhales and then he throws his lightsaber. It's like, I'll never turn to the dark side.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one thing, is that if the dark side was all powerful, Luke would have been done. He would have struck down Vader and he would have been the new apprentice of Palpatine. But I do think the light side came in and said, hey, level set. And when he did that, or level set, you're going to become your dad. You're going to essentially, the vision that you saw on Dagobah is what's going to happen. You will become your father. And that's where he kind of allowed the light side to overtake him again. And then, release that anger. And I think that shows that's true. In other aspects, I really couldn't, from a Luke perspective or from a Jedi during the Clone Wars, or during I should say not the Clone Wars, but the prequel trilogy, not really. The one area that I see this come into effect is in The Force Awakens, where, Kylo Ren has just killed his dad, killed Han Solo, and Chewie shoots him with his bowcaster, which, by the way, props to Kylo Ren. We all know how powerful the bowcaster is, and he took that shot like a champ.
Yeah. Right.
But he was hurt. He was severely hurt. And when he was out dueling Finn and Rey, he kept hitting that wound to cause more pain for him to become more powerful in the dark side to defeat both of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that would be the only other instance that I could clearly say that's him channeling the dark side, using hatred, emotion, pain to become more powerful in the dark side when he needs it to overtake his enemies.
Yep. And I think and you're right. Like, to me, that is a compelling reason to say the dark side is stronger. There's an asterisk still there. We'll come to that again. Come back to the asterisk here at the very end. Okay, so the one instance that I think I've always maybe thought there was a potential where somebody was tapping into the dark side that wasn't necessarily explicit. I want your thoughts on this because we've never talked about it. But if you go back to the Phantom Menace, you've got Qui-Gon Jinn. He's sitting there meditating, being the Jedi that he is. Kenobi's in the back. He's hyped up on all kinds of emotion and adrenaline, right? Qui-Gon walks in. They have their fight, and he dies. And what's the first thing that Kenobi does? He yells and screams, no, right? Total emotion just pouring out of him that he just saw his master be killed, right?
Mm-hmm.
When that force field thing opens up, he comes out with a fury. Like, it doesn't look like your normal Jedi training. It looks more like Sith training. It looked like Darth Maul versus Darth Maul fighting each other, right? And I don't know how much of this was intentional or not, but I always got the sense that he was tapping into the dark side then. He was still bested by Darth Maul because Darth Maul was just kind of in his prime at that point. But it did feel like he needed that emotion to elevate him, to get him to that next level. Because if Qui-Gon couldn't have killed him, you could argue I would argue Qui-Gon was more powerful in the Force and more depth at lightsaber combat than Kenobi was. And suddenly you've got the Padawan coming in now trying to face this Darth Maul person who just killed his master. That doesn't seem like a fair fight. But because he taps into the dark side, it suddenly elevated him to that level and allowed him to at least hold his own until Darth Maul had that final moment where he sent him down the shaft. But do you see that as more of like focus and, than necessarily emotion? And then if it is emotion and rage, how close do you think, do you think he toyed with tapping into the dark side? Did he tap into the dark side? What are your thoughts there?
So for me, I when I first saw that back in 1999, I thought that as well. I was like, okay, is the fact that Obi-Wan could be playing that fine line between the light and the dark side going to be a story point for, this trilogy, the prequel trilogy? Um, and we got the answer, no. But I know George Lucas has said in a couple of behind the scenes, vignettes that they do that he used his emotion to come out and attack Maul. Now, he didn't say he tapped into the dark side. He just said he used his emotion. But that's what Sith do, right? They use their emotions to channel the Force, to aid them in whatever they are trying to beat, conquest, whatever. So I'm going to lean on the fact that he was just hype. And the reason why I say that is because, we see when Qui-Gon first gets stabbed, he yells out, he freaks out and yells out, no. Then we see his facial features like making that grimace and whatnot. But where I think he's just hype, and this just goes back to like me playing like sports in college and in high school, before the shield's open, he's there like hopping up and down. Like he's like, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready.
He's locked in.
Then
as the kids
he's locked in. And then he comes out and takes him on head on. I want to say that he did have emotions. He was emotional after seeing his master essentially gutted by this monster. But I think instead of falling to his emotions 100%, he used his emotions to focus, like you mentioned previously, then to get in the zone and then come out and take him out.
Okay.
Now, and Dale just put something in the chat, I'm going to refer to it, is that I think that if he was truly engulfed in rage and anger and he came out, and ultimately in the initial fight, Maul did best him. He had him on the ropes. I don't think that whole flipping out of the pit and then, calling Obi-Wan's saber to slice him in half, I don't think that happens, because at that point he would have been so engulfed with rage that he wouldn't have come to his mind, and Maul would have just slashed him down into the pit. But I do think he was able to collect himself. I think that's that moment that you see when he's hanging and he's like looking around. I think he was able to refocus and collect himself and then figure out, hey, I can do this way. And then, he flips out, calls Qui-Gon's saber, slices Maul in half. So I want to say, again, back to the original point, I don't think he was tempted. I don't think the dark side played a part. Yes, it was emotional for him, but I think he utilized that to essentially lock in on his opponent and come out and give his 100% focus on trying to defeat him.
Okay. So you're thinking it was more of like he was game ready.
Yeah, I think especially, like I said, he was bouncing there right before that shield opened, I would have done when I'm getting ready to, run on a football field. That's what I would do. So I think he was just getting locked in.
Okay. I think I side on this. I think I do side more on not necessarily tapping into the dark side, but I feel like it was all emotion driven because of the way he was tapping, the way he kind of came at him. I think he was trying. I don't think he was purposely or deliberately trying to tap into the dark side, because that is absolutely something Kenobi would never, ever do. But I think in that moment, as young as he was, seeing his master get killed by the devil himself, I think there was a moment there where he finally just gave into the emotion and realized that, oh my God, I'm really powerful, yet he wasn't powerful enough. And when he was humbled by hanging there, he realized, okay, that really wasn't the smart thing to do. Like I totally let my guard down and got my butt whooped. And now here I am dangling for my life. And this guy's just taunting me now, right? You saw two things happen there. You saw a Sith who became overly confident with what had happened and was just, playing with his food, if you will.
Right. Exactly.
And then you had someone else who decided to, okay, I need to go back to my training. I need to go back. What would Qui-Gon do? I'd like you said, I'd gather myself, find inner peace, not lash out in pure hatred and anger or use emotion, but my skill in the Force, trusting in the Force, trusting in the will of the Force. I think that's what happens, and that's why he allows him to kind of flip out and cut Maul in half. And to Dale's point, that's why he's suddenly shocked. Like, how the heck could he have done that? He was sitting there dangling and,
yeah, he had him dead to rights. He had him dead to rights, and
exactly.
he got out of it. Yeah, I can see that point of view, and I if that was what happened, like if that was confirmed by Pablo Hidalgo or somebody, I would accept it. I would accept it. I lean toward my theory, but no, if that came through, I would absolutely accept it because it makes sense.
Yeah. So on that same note, so let's play that scene just out a little bit longer, because I think this gets back into answering the question of, is the dark side stronger? We have Darth Maul getting cut in half, right? The two pieces of him fall down, and this has been confirmed. Like, we know for a fact that the reason why Darth Maul is alive and continues to live was because they needed to make more money. No, the reason why he's alive, I'm kidding. The reason why he's alive is because of his hatred, right? That's where the hatred for Kenobi starts. And his pure hatred, tapping into that dark side, is what allowed him to fall down that tunnel, lay there in two pieces, and then suddenly come back to life as the Spider Maul, right? So that's one way. When we talked about life preservation, that's a great, clear example of life preservation that I don't think none of the Jedi have ever demonstrated, right? You got a Jedi and they're dead. Look at Indira, right, from The Acolyte. Look at Kenobi. Look at Qui-Gon Jinn. Look at, who else? There's tons of Yaddle. Goes on and on and on. So that's one example. That same example is something that we see when we get to Revenge of the Sith as well. When, for me, again, my interpretation, I'm not saying this is the right way, but my interpretation of Anakin Skywalker being able to survive getting his limbs cut off and burning literally on this planet of fire, hell, literal hell, as George Lucas likes to call Mustafar. The only way he would have survived that is because of his pure rage and hatred. I mean, he literally yells out, "I hate you," right? And he does it with such fierce ferocity and intenseness, and you can see it in his eyes, and he's burning internally and externally. I mean, that's really what allows him to stay alive as long as he does. When Palpatine gets there, and I think someone was talking about this in the chat, I've never subscribed to the theory that Palpatine somehow stole Padme's force and gave it to Anakin to live. I know that's been around since, oh my God, since the Revenge of the Sith. Since
Revenge of the Sith.
No, I've heard that
theory for a long time. Yeah.
And I've never really bought into it. Like, I totally get it and I like it. It's kind of a cool theory, but I didn't buy that. For me, it was just as simple as he was so angry that by the time Palpatine shows up, he's able to get him over where he needs to get and get him all hooked up to all the mechanical stuff and all that. And that Padme truly did die of a broken heart. I mean, as corny and as cheesy as that may sound, her will to live was gone because her significant other, Anakin Skywalker, was now gone, right? He had gone to the dark side. And so she had no will to live. I'm not going to get into all that because we're not going to talk about that. That's a whole nother conversation. But I guess what I'm saying is that was another example where the dark side did prove to be extremely strong, more so than you would argue with the light side, because he was able to survive that horrible, thing that he went through where, again, limbs are cut off, burning, and can't breathe. His lungs are getting burned up as well. There's no way anybody would have been able to survive that unless they were made of pure hate and tapping into the emotion and gaining strength through their emotions through the dark side.
But see, that's the key though, is in order to do that, you have to live in perpetual hate and perpetual pain to survive that. That's what Maul did to survive. Even after, he got his regular legs after, his original ones were cut off. He says he lives in perpetual pain. That's the only way he could survive. If we read some of the, I think this was in some of the Vader comic books or in a novel, that Palpatine gave him the worst equipment to make his, bionics out of, so uncomfortable and painful. That was done on purpose for him to live in perpetual pain. So he would always have to be in the dark side. Back in the old days of Star Wars, when I was reading some of the novels, and all these novels are now considered legends, but we go back to with Shadows of the Empire novel. And they talk about how Vader, while he's in the Bacta tank, he's able to make strides to breathe without assistance.
Mhm.
And when he makes those strides, he becomes happy. And when he becomes happy, his health starts to fail him again. And he comes on the verge of dying because he's released some of that hate.
Yeah.
And that's what's required of the dark side to stay within him to keep him alive.
Yeah.
So he has to hold on to that hate.
Yeah, he's a prisoner to the dark side because of his own health.
That's why I don't think the dark side is stronger. It's like a drug addict, and I hate to use the term because
we're gonna go there. It's in my notes too.
Yeah,
so it's in my notes.
Addiction is not. Addiction is a disease, and addiction is nothing to joke about. I just want to preface what I'm going to say here.
Right.
But we're using it in the world of the Star Wars galaxy. They're like an addict. Once they take a hit, they're perfect until they have to take another one. And in order to stay in that zone, they have to keep taking a hit, and then that slowly destroys their soul, slowly destroys their body. Look what it did for Palpatine, right? By the end of, we know he comes back somehow, but at the end of Return of the Jedi, he was a decrepit old form of a body. There's a price to pay, and if you don't pay that price, you don't accept that power.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say once you're in that mindset of perpetual pain, perpetual hate, then that's when the dark side can become powerful for you. If we talk back to the addiction analogy, if someone comes in with good intentions, not bringing you pain, not bringing you hate, to pull you out of your addiction disease, that's the light side. And that's the analogy I make. That's the light side coming through. And we all know how powerful addiction is. And if we, associate it with, the dark side of the force, it is addictive and it is powerful. But the light side can still come in, provide you peace. And even though that peace may mean your death, it's still peace.
Yeah.
And then you're able to finally release the darkness, release the pain, release the anger. And if you're able to survive, come back to a sense of being able to live without having all of that in your life.
Yeah.
That's the analogy that I would make between the two. But again, the sacrifice that you have to make to utilize the dark side is so great. If it was just a power that you could tap into and say, okay, now I'm powerful, can do all this, that would definitely mean the dark side is stronger. But the sacrifice that one has to make to practice in the dark side, that just shows that unless you do that, the dark side is nothing. Because if you don't subscribe to the hate, if you don't subscribe to the pain, the dark side has no power over you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I always say the light side is stronger, because in order to utilize the dark side, you have to sacrifice your soul to utilize the dark side to its full potential.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting you said that. I don't know if you've ever seen, but there's if you got to YouTube and you do a search for some of the George Lucas conversations that he had with the Clone Wars creative writing team, and there's a very young Dave Filoni sitting at that table. They talk about all of this. And at one point, he actually gets into the drug analogy. George Lucas says it almost word for word with what you just said, where as a Sith, they want more and they want more and more, and because they become addicted. And it's not enough to do just the stuff they've been doing. They've got to find a new drug, something more powerful, right? And eventually that does lead to their downfall. That is the downside of all of this, is that there are repercussions for all of this power. So go out there if you guys want to look at it, do a search for it. It's a great part where he's talking about anger and leading to hate, and hate leading to suffering, and the suffering is what the Sith go through, and that does fuel their power. Let's see. I just want to go to the chat. I'm sorry, I haven't really been paying attention to the chat because I've been engrossed in the conversation. But Paisley said, "Are all dark characters in some sort of pain and suffering?" I would argue yes. The only one that I'm not aware, well, that's not true. I think all of them have shown that they are in some level of pain and suffering, whether that's emotional or physical, can be both at times. I want to talk about that here in just a second as well. Kamir was one that I was like, he seems pretty like happy and pretty level set and level headed, and then, we see him with his shirt off and he's got all the scars where he'd been whipped over and over again. So I would say yes, all of them are in some level of suffering and pain. And then my Star Wars guy says it's like Darth Bane allowing the basilisk to feed on him to wear the armor and get stronger due to the pain. That's absolutely right. The what was it? The obelisk armor that he wears, Darth Bane wears in the Bane trilogy novels. He suffers the entire time, and in fact, when that comes off, it's kind of when he's at his weakest point. And I forget now. One of the apprentices was trying to figure out a way to get the armor off of him because she realized that the only way she was ever going to kill him and take his spot as the master would be to figure out a way to get that armor off of him, because otherwise he was, pretty much immortal or impenetrable with that on him. So all those examples are real. I would say, at least from going back to canon, they've pretty much stuck to that. There aren't really, in my knowledge, aren't really clear examples where people had to made their, I guess, Sith lords or people that follow the dark side had to make conscious decisions to stay in the dark in order to survive. What I would say is that we have very clear examples now, thanks mostly in part to the comics, where Vader is constantly being tortured by Palpatine, not only emotionally, but physically. I mean, at any given moment, he would just lay out Force lightning on him over and over again. He did the same thing to Darth Maul. We know this from the comics. Maul would suddenly just get pelted with Force lightning, and it was just a way to kind of keep him in check and make sure that he hated his master and was suffering and he was in pain, right? All of this just kind of helped feed him to become more stronger, because the stronger the apprentice was, made the master that much stronger. Even when you look at Kylo Ren, right? And Snoke, we know that Snoke was doing the same thing, whether it was, a lot of that was emotional, playing on the part of like how much of a failure you are and this and that, right? Just beating him down emotionally. But there were moments too where he was racking him with Force lightning as well. So it is a very common theme that they would do that, and that they do have to stay in that pain in order to ensure that they stay powerful or they stay at the top of their game. But I don't know that we've had anything, at least in canon, where someone gave up that ability in order to and found peace and was able to kind of either die or pass on or get past it all. I mean, you think about, again, I don't want to bring in legends here too much, but you think about the Sith code. The very first line is "Peace is a lie. There is only passion." I mean, right from the get-go, they're telling you that we don't believe in peace. We believe in pure passion, and from passion we get strength, and strength gives us power, and through power I gain victory, right? To kind of paraphrase the Sith code. It's very, very, very different. So, all right. So I know we're getting over on time here. So I want to kind of go back to some of the examples. So we talked about Anakin surviving the fight on Mustafar, his hatred there. I had Mace and Palpatine as an example. This is an age-old debate, I think, where people have always questioned whether or not did Mace Windu best Palpatine, or did Palpatine simply play dead possum, knowing that Anakin would show up and use that to manipulate Anakin, right, and turn him into Death Star. Again, a topic for another day.
Right.
But I think Mace Windu is in a very unique position in that he, even in canon, we know that he was kind of both light and dark. He was able to kind of tap into both of them. So what I would say is, at least in that scene, I think he does tap into his emotions. I think he does literally tap into the dark side. Mace Windu does. But he is one of those people that is able to do that. In fact, there's a couple novels where they kind of reinforce this idea that he is definitely someone who can kind of walk the line and still have the discipline not to be carried into the dark side or fall down that trajectory. But he's a very unique character in that perspective. But another example where I think we get to see the power of the dark side from Mace Windu, but then we see the power of the dark side from Palpatine when, he says unlimited power and he just unleashes all of that. Mace Windu is still able to kind of keep him at bay. It's only because Anakin Skywalker intervenes and cuts Mace Windu's hand off that Mace unfortunately falls and maybe dies. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. I always subscribe to the fact that Palpatine rolled the dice. He rolled the dice for Anakin to show up, and he rolled the dice for Anakin to actually incapacitate Windu so that Palpatine could take him out. That's my take on it. Because Anakin could have just taken 2 steps back, and I honestly think Mace would have ended him. But what I think to the point that, because he was hitting him hard with that force lightning. Again, he was using his lightsaber like a lightning rod to block it back into him. Again, deforming him, right?
Mhm.
Showing his true form. And I do think that did weaken him significantly. But like you said earlier, because of the rule of two and how it works, the more powerful your apprentice is, the more powerful the master becomes. And I think at that point, when Anakin, cut Mace Windu's arm off, full on the emotionally in the dark side. Again, he's afraid for his wife's life. He wants to be able to save his wife because Palpatine is manipulating him, giving him visions that his wife is going to die in childbirth. He's emotional. He's full. At that point, I believe as soon as he walks in that door, he's already turned. I don't think there is a situation where, he's like, what have I done? No, that's not where I think when he walked in that door, maybe going back when he got into the ship, he was turned because he knew he needed a Sith Lord to save his wife.
Yeah.
And I think from that point on, maybe not officially, they didn't confirm it, but from that point on, he was Darth Sidious' apprentice. And he used his power. He cut Mace Windu's arm off. And I think that in turn gave Palpatine or Sidious the jolt he needed to come up with a limited power to take out Mace Windu with Force lightning. That's been my theory since I've seen since the first time I saw Revenge of the Sith.
So you're saying in that moment, Anakin was cauterized as the pupil to Palpatine.
Yeah, I think the moment he came, I go all the way back to the moment he decided to go to Palpatine's office. Because remember, Mace gave him specific instructions to stay put in the council chambers. And when he disobeyed that order, I knew we all knew what was going to happen.
His destiny was done.
But his destiny was sealed at that point.
Yeah.
So,
and just to be clear, I was making a joke because you said cauterized, right? He cut off the arms, but that was it. Just okay. And nobody got that joke. Maybe somebody did. I got
it, but yeah. I was in thought.
Okay, so we've covered some pretty good examples, I think, so far. Is there anything else that we need to talk about? Where we have clear examples of where the dark side has been, quote, stronger, or at least surprising, that we haven't talked about. Anything significant? I mean, there are other examples. I mean, we could go on forever here, but
forever. I think for me, the biggest example is the type of manipulation the dark side can do. Again,
and this goes back to the Palpatine thing I was talking about earlier, where he took over the Senate in the Republic. But please go on. Sorry.
No, I just think that if there's, I think from a combat level, arguably, you can make an argument that the dark side is stronger. Although at the end of the day, maybe the dark side wielder cuts through a couple of Jedi or light side users, but at the end of the day, it's a light side person that ends it. So I don't think that from a combat point of view, the dark side is stronger, no matter how much hate or pain you are to channel the dark side. But where I do see the dark side having an advantage is the ability to manipulate and cloud judgment and cloud visions to what the dark side user wants. I think that is a power that we don't have, like a comparable power. I mean, you can't say the Jedi mind trick, but I think the mind trick is for one individual at a specific time. But the manipulation that the dark side has can manipulate thousands and thousands of people and manipulate environments and situations that are huge. And that's a simple Jedi mind trick doesn't do that, right?
Yeah.
So I think if there is any indication where the dark side might be stronger, it's in that scenario.
Yeah, and I think they've been it was Jedi mind trick earlier on. Over the years, that's been dropped. Like, they don't really reference it as a Jedi mind trick. It's something that's more, it's a synonym, or it's kind of part of the lexicon. But when you talk to Jedi and Jedi refer to that ability, it's usually referred to as force persuasion, right? It's got a nicer tone to it. You're persuading somebody. You're not tricking them. Tricking has a negative connotation. But even then, like even in the High Republic during those novels, the idea that forced persuasion, that was kind of like a big no-no. Like you really shouldn't do that. Even though the Jedi have done it in the past, that was something that was kind of frowned upon.
No.
I'm trying to think of the exact examples, but I know Dooku went through it. Some of the other Jedi during the High Republic went through it. It was talked about.
Yeah.
But I can see that because it is, like you said, it is a manipulate. You're manipulating somebody for arguably selfish reasons. It's not a selfless act. And so therefore it's a little taboo. Like it's nothing that the Jedi should be actively doing it, but somebody like Kenobi, yeah, you know, against the bad guys probably makes sense. He would do it.
Yeah, and here's it was referenced, like the idea that it's not really encouraged by the Jedi Order. It was kind of referenced, not directly, like kind of an offshoot. But keep in mind, Qui-Gon used a Jedi mind trick against Boss Nass to give him a transport. Tried to use it against Watto, but he's a Toydarian. Mind tricks don't work on him. But then, when we get to the point where the Queen Padme is going to talk to Boss Nass to see if the Gungans would join their fight against the Trade Federation, he clearly says we can't use our power to help her because he understands that Gungans are simple-minded, and he could just wave his hand and make them say yes.
Force them all to do it.
Force them all to do everything. But he says, yeah, we cannot use our power to help her. And that shows that, yeah, the use of forced persuasion is still kind of not encouraged. However, the reason why I think it is used, Kenobi uses it in A New Hope. Like I say, we see Qui-Gon use it in The Phantom Menace. I believe it is acceptable when it can avert violence, because like obviously rolling into Mos Eisley and the stormtroopers confront them, the only other option if Kenobi didn't use his mind trick was going to be to whip out his lightsaber and slash.
And that whole mission went right down the tube right there at that moment.
But he utilized forced persuasion to get out of it without violence and to keep their cover.
Yeah. No, I agree. Like I get where he would use it. He's willing to use it. I mean, Qui-Gon's a totally different breed. Like he was kind of a maverick to be. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, everything from that to the dice manipulation, right? You know, he's a little different, which is why we love him so much. But I would agree. Yeah. Like for the idea of forced persuasion is pretty powerful, and it can be a powerful thing for a dark side user. And like in to the point of we made earlier, where the Jedi were not so up on training that, Palpatine is the extreme example of where that could really become powerful and allow someone to be completely selfish in its use. So
yeah, and I don't recall, at least it may have been in some of the TV shows, but I don't recall it ever being used by a dark side user in the films. So I the only thing I see is in the prequels where Palpatine uses the mass manipulation and clouding of the Force to get to where he wants to get to. But I don't recall seeing Darth Vader, trying to trick someone with a Jedi mind trick.
Yeah,
or a mind trick. I should say.
Khmer did that though. I don't know. I don't remember now. Okay. I want to kind of wrap this up. I know I wanted to get into some examples of Jedi powers, and we could argue whether or not those were more powerful. I think we've done some of that already. We've talked about Jedi mind tricks. We've talked about, Force ghosts. A great one that you have in here is this Force projection. I think the jury is still out on this because we really don't understand the minutia or the details or how the soup was made for Luke to do Force projection. Is that a noble trait? Is it not a noble trait? Certainly it took his life. So, there's something to be said there, but we've never seen anyone else ever do anything like that, Right.
Exactly. So, and that's why because what he did was a selfless act. He knew he was sacrificing
knowing
himself.
Knowing that he was going to die because of it.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, the movie references this at the beginning of the movie. I know a lot of folks are like, "Oh, he just died because he felt like dying," or "He just died because he was tired." They were
They didn't
comparing
pay
it to.
attention. Yeah.
They didn't pay attention because Kylo said, because he thought Rey was in front of him via force projection, and he's like, "I know you're not doing this because the effort would kill you."
Right.
You know, so we know that it's something that you wouldn't survive, and Luke knew that too, but he did it so that the resistance would have a chance to continue. But again, I haven't seen, or again, it could be in a novel or comics, which, I'm not really into that. But from a visual media perspective, I haven't seen a Sith or a dark side user like do that. Now,
No, it's been brand new. Like there's
yeah.
been variances like in Old Republic stuff, but not exactly the same.
Right, exactly. And I know there's the whole dyad thing, but that's an exception because they're a dyad. To Rey and Kylo, they're able to, be seen even though they're light years away because of that dyad. I don't think that it was like one of them is stronger in the Force and can do it, or Kylo could do it because he's in the dark side. I don't think that was the thing. I think it was the dyad that did that. But from Luke's perspective, being a powerful Jedi, that is a light side power, and we don't have a reference for it for the dark side that shows how powerful the light side is when it needs to be.
Yeah. It's same thing with like the transferring of the lightsaber through the Force and all that. I mean, that's a whole nother thing because they're the dyad, right? They're doing things that even Jedi or Sith have never done before because of that special bond that they have. That's how it's been explained, and
right.
That's what I stick to in terms of theory. Okay, so maybe let's end on this. I want to bring up kind of maybe for some people, I would say this is the final verdict or the final answer, and whether or not the dark side is stronger. I want to go to someone named George Lucas, and so George Lucas has got a couple of quotes out there where he's kind of talking about light side, dark side, and all of that. Some of the stuff we've already talked about. But I just want to throw this in there for the context of the conversation. So this is him in that same conversation that I mentioned where he's talking to Dave Filoni and the other writers there on the Clone Wars during the development of that. He's talking about light side versus dark side, selfless versus selfish. He says the Sith are always unhappy because they never get enough of anything they want. Mostly their selfishness centers around power and control, and the struggle is always to be able to let go of all that stuff. Right? They can't let go of stuff. They get so much power. They accumulate so much power. So they're controlling so many things that they're fearful that someone's going to come in and take that away from them. And so that leads them to being angry and then suffering, right? Or fear, then anger, and then suffering. And he goes in that whole thing, that whole piece he talks about there. We see a clear example of this during Revenge of the Sith, where Anakin is struggling with what he's going through, and he says, I want more, and I know I shouldn't, right? He's feeling that temptation of wanting more, that addiction of trying to get the next buzz, and he just can't break it because he's too far gone at that point. He's already gone down the dark side, right? But this is the one that's really kind of the maybe the definitive, again, for some people, answer to whether or not the dark side is stronger. And so this is, again, George Lucas. This is from the Attack of the Clones DVD commentary. I haven't seen this anywhere else. He's not really talked about anywhere else. This is the only place that I could find that I remember anyways, that he did talk about this. But this is him talking about whether or not the dark side is stronger. He says, Anakin saying, I'm not going to let this happen again. So he's talking about Anakin's mom has died. He went through the suffering and all the pain and anger of that. And now he's got Padme going, he's seen the Force vision and he's telling himself, I'm not going to let this happen again. He goes on to say, we're cementing his determination to become the most powerful Jedi. The only way you can really do that is to go to the dark side, because the dark side is more powerful. So if you want the ultimate power, you really have to go to the stronger side, which is the dark side. But, and here's the but ultimately it'll be your undoing. So from George Lucas's perspective, what he's saying is the dark side is stronger, but you're always going to have the downside to it. There's always going to be repercussions. It's not going to be a nice life, right? And for a lot of the dark side users, that's okay, right? If you go back to the Sith code, peace is a lie. there is only passion. Through passion, I gain strength. Through strength, I gain power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory, I break my chains are broken. The force shall set me free. Nowhere in there does it talk about doing anything for anyone else but yourself, right? It is 100% selfish. And so you're not really worried about peace. You're not worried about creating relationships or sustaining relationships. You're not worried about life, other people's lives or their well-being or any of that stuff. You're completely absolved of having to worry about any of that. So if the repercussions are such that, oh, I'm going to look disfigured, I'm going to have yellow eyes and my skin's going to start turning a weird color. And, I'm going to be in pain all the time, but I'm going to have all this power and no one can take this power from me. And I'm just going to continue to become stronger. That for them, it seems like it's an easy answer. I'm going to go to the dark side and I'm going to do that. And I don't really care about any other stuff. But for us as real people and like the Jedi, when they look at that, that is not necessarily life. That is not peace. That is not something to aspire towards. And so, yes, when you look at it through the lens of that, when you look at it through the lens of the beholder, if all you want is true ultimate power, if you really want to be the strongest you can be, then at least from George Lucas' perspective, the dark side is the side you want to go to. It is going to be stronger. That completely flies in the face of what Yoda says. But Yoda is coming from a different point of view. He's coming from he's got a different angle through a different lens. His idea of what stronger means is that peace. It is everything that the Sith code is not, everything that the Jedi code is, right? So depending on your point of view, depending on how you're looking at what is stronger, what is strength, will determine whether or not you feel like the dark side is stronger than the other. But the maker says the dark side's stronger, so maybe that's it. But what do you when you hear all that, I guess, what are your thoughts on that, and how does that play into with what you were saying earlier? Do you I guess maybe your final thoughts on whether or not you feel like one is stronger than the other, and which would that be?
Ultimately, I can understand where George Lucas is coming from. I don't necessarily agree. I know that's what he said, but the content, in my opinion, says it differently. If we look at history and we look at situations like addiction, when you have to make great sacrifices to obtain power and then continue those sacrifices to maintain that power, ultimately it ends. And ultimately it ends with your destruction. In the interim, could you be more physically powerful? Maybe, maybe not. Because again, arrogance is a great blinder, right? And that's one of the flaws of the Sith, if you could say. I mean, it's a flaw of the Jedi too. Ultimately, arrogance kind of undid them. But look at Maul. Again, he was arrogant playing with Obi-Wan at the end there, where if he would have just sliced him, he would have been done. Arrogance is the ultimate flaw of the Sith. So I think that if the end to the means results in the end of your being, that side is not powerful. I think if you take one person, if you take a force user, one's the dark side, one's a light side. This guy is powerful, but he is miserable. He is in pain. He is alone, versus someone who has power, maybe not the physical power, but has free will, has peace, has happiness. If you look at it from a high level perspective, this person is more powerful because this person can do what they want to do. This person has to do what they have to do to maintain their power. Now if they fought, yeah, the more powerful one would win. But if they go on their separate journeys, this person has the power. This person is a slave. This is a slave to the dark side, and that's no way to live. So if you look at it from, again, it's a point of view. If you look at it from that point of view, no, there is no way the dark side is stronger. Again, maybe for like from a combat perspective, maybe, but from a life overall perspective, quality of life, yes, there is no way the dark side is stronger.
Yeah, and Lucas does say that. I mean, if you look at what he's saying, he says, So if you want the ultimate power, you really have to go to the stronger side, which is the dark side. So he's saying the dark side is stronger, but ultimately it'll be your undoing. So what he's saying is kind of what you just said. The argument is that yes, you're going to become more powerful, but in the end, it's short-lived. You know, right? It's fleeting. You're never going. It's because of the suffering, because of all that what you talked about, the pain, the suffering, and always having to maintain the upkeep of that dark side. Depending on your point of view, that's not necessarily a life that we aspire to be a part of.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
I can go both ways on this. Honestly, I think that, if I was taking the side of the dark side, and at least from a pure Sith, when I think of like the Banes, the Palpatines, if I want to get into legends, you could talk about Emperor, I forget his name, Viritate, but the Emperor himself. You think about those guys, they don't want any of what we talked about.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like they're not aspiring to be, have free will. They don't want any of that stuff. They're so far gone that for them, they believe what the code says, right? As long as they have strength and power, and as long as they've got victory, that their chains are broken, that they see that as a free will. So it comes back to perspective. It comes back to interpretation. It comes back to what you see and value as meaningful in your life. And somebody from the Sith would look at all the stuff that the Jedi are aspiring to and say, I don't want any of that. Right? All that matters to me is that I've got power. I don't care if I'm a slave to it. I love it.
Right.
It's seductive and I want more of it. Right. They're addicted in that sense. So, again, I know I've said this already, but it really depends on your perspective. Like, what do you want your life to be ultimately determines whether or not you feel the light side is stronger versus the dark side is stronger.
Right.
And the other definitive thing for me that determines whether or not the light side is stronger than the dark side is that I've been playing Star Wars: The Old Republic for about 10 years now, and the dark side is stronger. Those guys are always stronger than me in PvP. They always win. So if there's nothing else
Lord.
as far as a measuring stick goes, I can attest that the dark side people that I play in PvP always have the advantage and they always win, and I hate them. But sorry. Anyways, what were you going to say?
If I go back to Nintendo 64 and the Super Star Wars and Super Empire Strikes Back and Super Return of the Jedi, the dark side people are the hardest, but you can't beat them. The one thing I got to say about, that's true that those people, all they want is the power. That's what they don't care about peace. They don't care about quality of life. They want the power. But from what we've seen, at least in the movies, those individuals had to come to that conclusion by being manipulated. So it wasn't something, okay, maybe we take Anakin. Yeah, he feared losing he feared losing his mom, and then that led to his fear of losing Padme, which led him to fall to the dark side. But those two situations, I do believe Palpatine had a hand in the manipulation of Anakin Skywalker. We know for a fact that Snoke manipulated the heck out of Ben Solo to get him to become Kylo Ren. That's why you have to trick people to follow the dark side. Now I know it's probably
a Ponzi scheme, man.
It's a multi-level marketing scheme, definitely. You get power, I get power. You know what I'm saying? Right. But I just think that I can't speak for the dark side users that are in like books and comic books because I don't read those things that much. But from a visual media perspective, movies and TV shows, everyone that is in a dark side user, with the exception of Palpatine, we don't know his backstory. But Anakin, Kylo Ren, Darth Maul, Savage Opress, God, what's her name? Asajj Ventress, Count Dooku, they were all manipulated to join the dark side. And whether it was because they didn't want to lose a loved one or the events around them were manipulated to have them become disenfranchised with the status quo. They were all manipulated. They were essentially tricked to join the dark side. So, yes, and that's what caused them to crave that power and essentially become an addict. That's one of the arguments I have on the dark side not being powerful, because if it was truly all powerful, people would aspire to be on the side of the dark side. And I know there's some individuals that do in books and legends and whatnot, but I'm talking about, like, again, the people that we see on the screen, they were essentially tricked. So that's why I don't think I'll ever believe the dark side is stronger, because you have to jump through hoops and essentially be manipulated to get there. Then once you're there, you have to sell your soul to the devil himself to keep your power and to keep gaining power. You have to sacrifice pieces of yourself. You have to sacrifice individuals to keep that power. And that's why, because of all that, there is no way the dark side can be stronger.
All right. So you're saying the dark side isn't stronger. Yeah. Dark side isn't stronger, but they do have a better marketing team and better lawyers. That's what I'm hearing you say.
And they have cookies. And the dark side has cookies.
Right. So there's a good reason to switch over to the dark side there. Before we go, I want to just quickly go to the comments. Rob says, would you say, oh man, Elzar Mann and Avar Kriss staying together at the end of the High Republic was an act that shows the light side is stronger than the dark side? I personally, yes, 100%. But I mean, Rob, One Up versus CPU, Reader Reborn, a lot of these guys have been following us because of the High Republic coverage. You know my take on this. Like, I was all for those two getting together, and I love the fact that as powerful as they were, I felt like they complemented each other. And I really wanted the High Republic to kind of be hey, this is the example of where you can have relationships and what's the word that they always use? But you can have a relationship in Star Wars and still be okay, because I think that bodes well for, like, Kylo Ren and Rey at some point down the road when he comes back to life. I think it bodes well for the Mara Jade and Luke Skywalker story that I'm hoping we get someday, right? So yes, I agree. I would say that it's definitely shows that you can have those things and still be powerful. Let's see, what else do we have in here? I don't think, quote, a steward of the dark means he fell to the dark side. I could be wrong, but that's a strength of the light, being able to withstand it without being it. I'm not sure where that one came from there. I don't remember the context of that one, but yeah, I don't know that there's any more to say. Again, I think I'd love to hear what other people think, and it can be very black and white. Like, you don't have to provide context to me at all. But I would love to know what people think of, if you had to pick a side that you felt was stronger, light side versus dark side, based on your own experiences, based on the things that you've read, the things that you follow, the dogma you subscribe to, your belief, whatever it is. I would want to know what people think. I think if you took a poll, my guess is that you would have probably an even split, as crazy as that may sound. But I do know that there are a lot of people out there that love the dark side and feel like it is powerful. And you got people that are like, that are very headstrong about, like, no, there's just no way. And I think, again, it really just kind of comes down to, one, if you want to be funny or be rage bait versus, other people that just, truly believe that. So,
yeah. And here's the thing is that this is not fact. Everything we're discussing, all of these points of information, it's not fact, because all it takes is for Dave Filoni or Pablo Hidalgo to come out and say, this is how it is. And then all our theories go in the toilet. That's how delicate this particular subject is. Whenever it comes to the Force, the topics of discussion and how people side one way or another, we all have to take it with a grain of salt. We all have to respect each other's opinions, because, again, we're not lore masters. I don't care what anyone on the internet says. There's only two true lore masters. Their names are Pablo Hidalgo and Dave Filoni right now. And the reason why I say they're the only two is because they're in charge. They're in charge of the lore, and they can change lore at a whim's notice to satisfy a storyline or whatever. So I say, let's keep this dialogue going, because as of right now, we're free to play and give our opinions on what the Force means. What does balance of the Force means? And, Albert, we talked about that. That's also a hot topic that seems to come back up here in the last few months. Because at any moment, our theories could be shot down immediately if they come down and say, no, this is what it is. And then that's it.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think to be fair, I think there's 3 people on the story group and they all kind of equal say, although Pablo Hidalgo is kind of like the spokesperson. He's the elder.
Exactly.
Leland Chi has dropped out. He's no longer part of the story group, but he was another one that was up there for a while. But you're right. I mean, it's really kind of comes down to those. And then it also goes back to the writers. I mean, interesting enough, the writers can write what they want and they'll go check and say, hey, does this break anything? Disney has been pretty lenient about allowing things to happen. That's why we see a lot of the stuff that we saw in The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, even The Force Awakens.
Right.
So all of this, again, to your point, could change. Again, going back to what I said about George Lucas, right? The loyalists, I've talked about this many times on the show, but there's different sects of fandom, and you've got the George Lucas loyalists, and they will always go back to this quote and say, dark side's stronger. The maker said so, and that's the reason it is. And that's totally cool too. Like, these are all opinions, right? Like, to your point, we're not trying to declare anything or prescribe it or be prescriptive in any way here by any means. So, but I do want to hear what other folks think. Alex already chimed in and said the dark side because good is dumb. He's quoting Spaceballs there because that's what
and much love to the costuming group, the 501st. I'm sure if you polled all of them, 100% would say the dark side is strong.
Right. Yeah.
It's your point of view. And that's what makes this great. If we all had the same opinion,
it'd be boring.
It would be boring.
Yeah. And you and I wouldn't have anything to talk about.
We have anything to talk about. No. So I think it's good that we all have these varied opinions, and it's good that we can discuss them. And it's good that in some aspects we agree to disagree and not have it break down into a horrible argument, calling each other names and saying we're not real fans or anything like that. That's what this is the kind of discord we need in the Star Wars fandom now. Not bashing each other. Let's support each other and understand that this is a fantasy world. This is fiction. This is not fact. Nothing in this is factual, and we can run with our own headcanon if we want to, or we can strictly stick to the canon that's written down. We can do whatever we want. It's a fictional fantasy galaxy. So let's just enjoy it and keep arguing about why I'm right that the light side is stronger.
Right. Yeah. Get that little ass
get
dagger
that
on the
last
side
one
there.
in there. Yeah,
little twist there of the dagger. All right. Well, hey, thank you guys for joining us on discussion. Hopefully this was entertaining. Hopefully you found it interesting. It's been a lot of fun to talk about. I know we've been trying to do this show for a while, and I really enjoyed talking about this, especially putting the show notes together. But I also want to talk. I'm looking forward to the next one, which is Balance of the Force, because we've got all kinds of stuff that we can talk about that one. So that'll be next Sunday. Next Sunday, Patreon exclusive. We'll do the same thing here on Sunday night, 9 p.m. Talk about Balance of the Force, and I've got all kinds of quotes and stuff from Lucas and Filoni and other people that have spoken to Lucas and that sort of thing. So it'll be fun to break all that down. Thank you guys for what's that?
I hope we get the quote from Freddie Prinze Jr.
Oh yeah, it's in there. That was one of the very first one that I threw in there.
Yeah.
I've got one from him. I've got from Sam Witwer and a number of other people, but yeah. So thank you guys who joined us tonight for the live recording. Appreciate you jumping in. Paisley was with us. One Up versus CPU. Rob, my Star Wars guys. Alex, Dale, Jennifer K4413. There was also, let me scroll down here. There was a couple more at the very end. Oh boy, there's a lot of chatter here. Wow, you guys were really active today in the chat. So thank you.
Yeah, this was a hot topic.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Darth Tedious was the other one that jumped in here at the very end.
No, I was going to say, thanks to everyone who joined the discussion in the chat. I really enjoy reading your messages as we're doing this show. Encourage your Star Wars buddies to join. In situations like this, when we're talking about topics that that have various opinions. It's always good to hear as many opinions as we can. I'm a firm believer of, in situations like this, when we're having these discussions, again, friendly discussions about aspects of the Star Wars galaxy, the more the merrier. So to those that participated in the chat, I really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your evening to join us. But yeah, if you have other Star Wars friends or just friends in general that are curious about the fandom, have them come watch our next public show so that they can get a taste of what it's like to be a Star Wars fan and be here on the Cantina Cast.
Yeah. Yep. Well said. Thank you for doing that. Okay. Last thing before we go, tomorrow night, we will come back here 9 p.m. We are going to do the final hype show for Maul Shadow Lord. That'll be final hype Sunday. Like I mentioned, we've got Balance of the Force for Patreon members. And then Tuesday night, we will be breaking down the very first 2 episodes of Maul Shadow Lord. That'll take us through May 4th. We'll have Patreon episodes exclusively on the Sundays between now and May 4th. And then after May 4th, Chris, you mentioned at the top of the show, we are 100% locked in for Mandalorian and Grogu. So it's going to be a fun summer and a lot to talk about here with Star Wars. So
definitely.
Yeah. So any final thoughts before we get out of here?
No, just that I've really enjoyed this discussion. I think it's a discussion that enlightened me in some ways, and I hopefully my topics and my viewpoints enlightened you and some of our viewers that joined us in the chat. And I can't wait to do it again for the Balance of the Force show.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we will see you all here on the next episode.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.